Welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I'm sorry we had some technical difficulties, but we've got that resolved, and so we will begin. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritam cha garbhavasa deha pashamidrisham Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishnam Ishwaram Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namaha Om Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Bhurida Jana. So we'll continue with our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, where we left off last time. We were on April 22nd, 1883, in this book on page 218. And we're in the lower third of page 218. So on this day, April 22nd, Sri Ramakrishna had gone to Beni Madhav Pal's garden house in Sinti, which now is a neighborhood of Calcutta. At that time, it was outside of Calcutta. There they were having the semi-annual Brahmo festival. So Sri Ramakrishna, of course, as you know, if you've read the Gospel, or the life of Sri Ramakrishna for that matter, that he had become close to the Brahmo Samaj through Keshav Chandra Sen, Vijay Krishna Goswami, and other teachers of the Brahmo Samaj, but especially first through Keshav Chandra Sen, and then through some of the other associates and leaders of the Brahmo Samaj. And for Sri Ramakrishna, wherever people spoke of God, wherever people worshiped God, wherever people thought of God, that was a holy place to him. So in what we were reading last time, Sri Ramakrishna was talking with one of the preachers of the Brahmo Samaj. It doesn't give his name, it just calls him a preacher of the Brahmo Samaj. So the master said, in speaking with him, when the Godhead is thought of as creating, preserving, and destroying, it is known as the personal God, Saguna Brahman, or the primal energy, Adya Shakti. Again, when it is thought of as beyond the three gunas, then it is called the attributeless reality, Nirguna Brahman, beyond speech and thought. This is the supreme Brahman, Para Brahman. So this, of course, is familiar to anyone who has studied Sri Ramakrishna or Vedanta, that when we think of the reality, divine reality, in terms of creating, preserving, and destroying this universe, then we are thinking of Saguna Brahman, which is the same as Ishvara, what is called God or Allah, and many other names in different religious traditions. Our traditional idea of God, the supreme Lord of the universe, or Mother of the universe. So that is the infinite reality with qualities. That is, the qualities of creating, preserving, destroying the universe, the qualities of infinite love and compassion, the qualities of justice, and so forth. Those are all qualities associated with God. And so when we think of God as a person and God as one that we can relate ourselves to, pray to, and worship to, then we're thinking of Saguna Brahman, Brahman with qualities, and that means the personal God, Ishvara, in the most generalized term in the Hindu tradition for a God. In Hindu tradition, there are many gods and goddesses, but many of those gods and goddesses are just faces of the one Ishvara, the generic God, not meant in a derogatory sense, but the generic God in the sense that just God without further specification. And then when you think of reality in itself, not in relationship to the universe, but the reality in itself, that same reality is Nirguna Brahman, Para Brahman, Supreme Brahman. And so it's not that there are two realities, the personal God and the impersonal absolute. There's one reality, and depending on whether you think of it in its own nature as it is by itself, or if you think of it in relationship to the universe, you get these two aspects, the personal God as the reality in relationship to the universe and its living beings, or the supreme reality in itself, without any sense of relationship, beyond time and space, beyond any quality. There's nothing that can qualify it because it's beyond thought. So, and so Sri Ramakrishna, because he worshipped all aspects of God, but he most often spoke in terms of the Divine Mother, because that was his attitude. His attitude was that a worshiper of the Divine Mother, a child of the Divine Mother. And so he would call that Saguna aspect of Brahman, he would call it Shakti, the divine power. So he mentions here, or the primal energy, Adya Shakti, the beginning, the primordial Shakti, is Adya Shakti is what that means. He continues, under the spell of God's Maya, man forgets his true nature. He forgets that he is heir to the infinite glories of the Father. This divine Maya is made up of three gunas, and all three are robbers, for they rob man of all his treasures and make him forget his true nature. The three gunas are sattva, rajas, and tamas. Of these, sattva alone points the way to God, but even sattva cannot take a man to God. Now here he'll tell a story which many of you are familiar with, so I'll come to that in a moment. Before we read the story, however, let me just say a word about the three gunas for those who are not that familiar with the ideas. So as he says, it's under the spell of Maya that one forgets one's divine nature. It's through Maya that we become deluded, that we forget our true nature. And Maya is made of the three gunas. And so the three gunas are that which rob us of our identity with God. And so it's the effort of spiritual life, it's the intention of spiritual life to go beyond the three gunas, to become free of the three gunas. So those three gunas, known in Sanskrit as sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva being the quality of equanimity, the quality of clarity, the quality of purity, the quality of calmness, tranquility. Not sleepy calmness, but wakeful calmness. So that is sattva. So that is a very good quality that we seek to cultivate in spiritual life, and why I'll explain in a moment. The second quality is rajas. Rajas is passion, passionate activity, strong likes and dislikes. Oh, I like this, and oh, I hate that. That kind of passionate emotion. So rajas is activity, is passion, etc. And tamas, the lowest, is darkness, inertia, laziness, and it's also not just passive like laziness. It can also be destructive, that which destroys, that which darkens, that which destroys, that which deludes, and that which puts one to sleep. So every day, all of us go through these three gunas. That is, when we get tired and want to go to sleep, then we're overcome by tamas. And that has its place. If we don't sleep, of course, we can't live. And so that has its place. But it's tamas that makes us go to sleep. And when we wake up in the morning, sometimes we wake up bright and ready for action, then we're inspired by rajas. Sometimes we wake up and we feel, oh God, I just want to melt back into the sheets. I don't want to get up. Then we're still overcome by tamas. And sattva, again, is the quality of calmness, of benevolence, of clear-mindedness, tranquility, but an alert tranquility, not sleepy tranquility, not taking a nap time tranquility. So these are the three qualities that all of us go through, but a particular person will be, depending on their evolution in this life and across lifetimes, will be dominated by one of the gunas. We can change that. It's not that we're born with a nature and we can't change it, but we can change it through spiritual discipline and just the course of ordinary life also, we can change it. But at a particular stage of a person's life, it will be dominated by that. So a person who is basically tamasic, the adjective tamasic, then when they are in tamas, it's a very low state of tamas, which is very destructive and very, very a low state of manifestation of consciousness. And then rajas and sattva, when they go to a sattva, what for them is a sattvic state is when the tamas is a little less. And for a very sattvic person, yes, they also come to go through the course of these three gunas. But a sattvic person, sattva will be the main quality that they manifest. And so for them, when they are in relative to their normal state, when they're in a state of tamas, their tamas will be higher than the sattva of a person who's tamasic. And so the three gunas is not that you just have three gunas like three billiard balls, but it's a spectrum between these. Let me just say one more word and then we'll come to his story about the three gunas. That in Chinese thought they had the two principles of yin and yang. And so in Indian thought, there were the three principles, sattva, rajas, and tamas. So they don't exactly equate. There's a superficial equation you can make between yin and sattva and yang and rajas, but that doesn't match because sometimes yin is tamasic also. And sometimes yang can be sattvic, so that you can't make a one-to-one correspondence between a two-point system and a three-point system. It just doesn't work. The closest you can get is to say that in Chinese thought, you can have three by thinking of yin, yang, and the balance between the two, which comes closer to sattva. But it's not an exact match. So one has to be careful in relating the two. They don't really match up. So again, in Indian thought, there were these three, rajas and tamas and sattva. So sattva is not just the balancing of rajas and tamas. It's like a triangle. So you have rajas and tamas and then sattva up here. The balance point is higher than either of the other two. So let's come to Sri Ramakrishna's story. Let me tell you a story. Once a rich man was passing through a forest when three robbers surrounded him and robbed him of all his wealth. After snatching all of his possessions from him, one of the robbers said, What's the good of keeping this man alive? Kill him. Saying so, he was about to strike their victim with his sword, when the second robber interrupted and said, There's no use in killing him. Let's just bind him fast and leave him here. Then he won't be able to tell the police. Accordingly, the robbers tied him with a rope, left him, and went away. After a while, the third robber returned to the rich man and said, You're badly hurt, aren't you? Come, I'm going to release you. The third robber set him free and led him out of the forest. When they came near the highway, the robber said, "Follow this road and you will reach home easily." Then the man said, "But you must come with me too. You have done so much for me. We shall all be happy to see you at our home." "No," said the robber, "it is not possible for me to go there. The police will arrest me." So saying, he left the rich man after pointing out his way. Now, Sri Ramakrishna continues, the first robber who said, "What's the good of keeping the man alive? Kill him," is tamas. It destroys. The second robber is rajas, which binds a man to the world and entangles him in a variety of activities. Rajas makes him forget God. Sattva alone shows the way to God. It produces virtues like compassion, righteousness, and devotion. Again, sattva is like the last step of the stairs. Next to it is the roof. The Supreme Brahman is man's own abode. One cannot attain the knowledge of Brahman unless one transcends the three gunas. So yes, even that last step in the steps going up to the terrace of the house, on the roof of the house, even that last step has to be left behind in order to get to the terrace. And so that's a very beautiful story, which again, most or maybe all of you are familiar with. But it illustrates the three gunas in a beautiful way. Again, as he says, that tamas is that which destroys. And so the first robber who just wanted to kill the man to get rid of him, get rid of your problems by just killing him. That destructive tendency is tamas. So again, tamas is laziness, sleepiness in a more innocent sense, and in a less innocent sense, it can be destructive as well. And then Rajas was the robber who said, "No, we don't need to kill him. Let's just tie him up." Because Rajas, again, passion, intense activity, and all of that, is what binds us to the world. Not that tamas doesn't bind us. The tamas binds us so deeply that we don't even think of getting out. So Rajas is better than tamas, but it still binds us to the world. As Swami Vivekananda said, that in order to overcome tamas, we have to inspire in ourselves rajas, that is activity. But we should understand by that means inspiring sattvic rajas, or that is rajas which is inspired by sattva. If we're trying to rise in life, if we're trying to go upward, if we're trying to evolve, then we should be careful what type of rajas we try to inspire in ourselves. Now, Swamiji said for ordinary people, that any rajas is better than tamas. And so there was that man who came to Swamiji, and Swamiji said that he saw that this man was, as they say, good for nothing. That's not the words of Swamiji, but there are people who are good. They seem to be good because they don't do any harm, but then when you need help or something, you find that, well, they only seem to be good. They're actually good for nothing. They don't do anything good. They're too lazy to harm anybody. And so this man came to Swamiji and asked him about how he could become spiritual, what he needed to do. And Swamiji saw that he was a man who was immersed in tamas. And so Swamiji said, "Can you lie? Can you steal? That it is better that you do something bad than that you just rot away in tamas." So again, Swamiji said, "Don't misunderstand me. I'm not telling people that they should steal, that they should tell a lie and things like that. No, but activity is better than inertia." And so he used to say that we need to inspire rajas in order to overcome tamas. But rajas burns itself out. That is, it burns the person out. Not it doesn't burn itself out. It burns us out. That is, intense activity without rest. We get burnt out. And so rajas is not an end in itself. Rajas is only to stimulate wakefulness, so that then we have the will and the strength and the energy to pursue sattva. Sattva is what we want. And so for us, people who are not immersed in deep tamas, then when we try to inspire rajas in order to get over laziness, we should try to inspire rajas, which itself is inspired by sattva, that is good rajas, that is doing good things, good activity. Because again, remember, tamas, rajas, and sattva is a spectrum. And so in rajas, You can be on the tamasic side of rajas or on the sattvic side of rajas. So the tamasic side of rajas is someone who's a thief, very active, but doing all kinds of bad things. A friend of mine, when I first joined the monastery, one of our brahmacharyas in Chicago, he said that when he was a kid growing up, that he grew up in New York and in Miami, between the two cities. So I don't know which of the two cities it was in, but he had a neighbor in the apartment building where his family lived, a neighbor kid who was his friend. And the father of the neighborhood of the kid, he said, was the hardest working man he ever saw in his life. He would work 20 hours a day. But all of that work was for no good, hurting people and cheating people and so forth. So he's very active, he's very rajasic, but it was destructive rajas. That is, rajas inspired by tamas. So we want rajas inspired by sattva. Activity to get the mind and the will in motion, and then we can move towards sattva and come to equanimity, which is not sleepy equanimity, but a calm, tranquil equanimity, which leads us beyond the three gunas. So again, the preacher says, "You have given us a fine talk, sir." Master with a smile. "Do you know the nature of devotees? When one devotee meets another, he says, 'Let me speak and you listen. And when you speak, I shall listen.' You are a preacher and teach so many people. You are a steamship, and I am a mere fishing boat." And all laugh. So Sri Ramakrishna was never short of a good line for people. So again, for this day ends here, and so this portion that we read today, of course, in the earlier sections on the same day in the gospel, there were many other thoughts also, but on the portion we read today, the idea of the Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman, that is the absolute and God. God and the absolute are the same reality seen from different standpoints. The absolute is without any qualities, without any thought. As far as the absolute goes, there is no universe. That's why we don't worship the absolute, we don't pray to the absolute, because Brahman in itself is just immersed in its own glory. That sounds selfish. No, it's not selfish, because that is the whole of reality. We are that too. We are that too. Everything here is nothing but that. So there's nothing outside of it. It's the non-dual whole. But there's nothing outside of it. There's no time, there's no space, there's no causation, there's no activity. There's just infinite, indescribable bliss, infinite, indescribable awareness, infinite, indescribable existence. And so that is Brahman in itself. But when we're aware of the universe, then God comes into the picture. God is that same reality in relationship to this universe. So that's that's enough if we remember that. And then the rest of what we read on the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. One of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, whose picture we have over here on the wall, Swami Trigunatitananda. Swami Vivekananda once teased him that your name is so long that one has to breathe in the middle before one can pronounce it, Trigunatita Ananda. So he asked him to shorten it to Swami Trigunatita. And but Trigunatita Ananda means he who's bliss in that which is beyond the three gunas. And so that is the ultimate reality. So there's some in their spiritual life and at the heights of spiritual life who want to remain as Brahman. You look at someone like Ramana Maharshi, who always remained in the same state, always in a state of knowledge. There are others who want to enjoy the play, the divine play, seeing this whole universe as the play of God. So they want to live in the eternal awareness of God, but to enjoy the play and the manifestations of God. And so both are good. Those who are devoted to the absolute and those who are devoted to the personal God. They're devoted to the same thing, but the same reality, but different aspects of the same. Now, I'll begin the next day. I wanted to come to an end of a day because we're taking a break after this for a month, but let me begin the next day. We won't finish it, though it's a very beautiful day. It's in the same chapter, the Master and the Brahmo devotees, but this is Wednesday, May 2nd, 1883. About 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Sri Ramakrishna arrived at the temple of the Brahmo Samaj in Nandan Bagan, accompanied by M. Rakal and a few other devotees. So see, in the previous time, April 22nd, he was at a Brahmo festival at Beni Madhav Pal's garden house. Now he's come to the temple of the Brahmo Samaj in Nandan Bagan. Sri Ramakrishna at first the master sat in the drawing room on the ground floor where the Brahmo devotees gradually assembled. Rabindranath Tagore and a few other members of the Tagore family were present on this occasion. So the famous Rabindranath Tagore, the great poet and Nobel laureate, I believe the first Indian Nobel laureate in any field, was Rabindranath Tagore. I think he got the Nobel Prize around 1910, 1912, somewhere in there. One of those, 1910, 1912. And like Swamiji, when he came to New York, he was denied admission into a hotel because he was brown-skinned. Those were the bad old days of of institutionalized racial discrimination. Not that we're free of it now, but at least it's not institutionalized as it were, legally institutionalized as it was at that time. Sri Ramakrishna was asked to go to the worship hall on the second floor. A dais had been built on the eastern side of the room. There were a few chairs and a piano in the hall. The Brahmo worship was to begin at dusk. As soon as the master entered the worship hall, he bowed low before the dais. Having taken his seat, he said to M and the other devotees, "Narendra once asked me, what good is there in bowing before the Brahmo Samaj temple? The sight of the temple recalls to my mind God alone. Then God consciousness is enkindled in my mind. God is present where people talk about him. One feels there the presence of all the holy places. Places of worship recall God alone to my mind." So that's a beautiful idea, that Sri Ramakrishna would bow his head before Brahmo places of worship. So why did Narendra challenge Sri Ramakrishna and say, why do you bow before the Brahmo temple? When Swamiji himself was a follower of Brahmo Samaj in those days, he had not yet dissociated himself from the Brahmo Samaj. So why, in fact, he never really dissociated himself. It's just that he sort of grew out of it and didn't continue with it. But why did he ask Sri Ramakrishna that? Well, it was because the Brahmo Samaj said that you shouldn't bow before any image. And they didn't themselves bow in front of their own temple. They didn't bow in front of Hindu temples either, but they didn't even bow in front of their own because they were against image worship. And so even the building as an image was not part of their tradition. And so Swamiji thought that he knew that Sri Ramakrishna would bow his head before a Hindu deity, and that's accepted because that's what he does. He's a Hindu. But why would he do it to the Brahmo hall or temple when even the Brahmos don't do it? So that's the idea of Swamiji's objection. It wasn't that he thought, okay, it's okay to bow to the Kali temple, but why do you do it to the Brahmo temple? Because they're no good. No, he himself was a Brahmo. It's because it was something that even the Brahmos didn't do. Once a devotee was overwhelmed with ecstasy at the sight of a babla tree. The idea flashed in his mind that the handle of the axe used in the garden of the temple of Radhakanta was made from the wood of the babla. So that enkindled the memory of Radhakanta, the memory of Krishna and Radha and their Leela, just by seeing a babla tree. So you see the power of association, and that you see all through Sri Ramakrishna's life, the power of association. Seeing an English boy standing in Calcutta, bent in three places, it reminded him of Sri Krishna, who holds that pose playing the flute in the images of Sri Krishna, and he went into ecstasy. And so many other things. When he was passing through the streets of Calcutta in a carriage at night, and there were some drunkards enjoying hilarity on the side of the street. In their drunkenness, Sri Ramakrishna leaned out of the carriage, stood up and leaned out of the carriage, and went into ecstasy also, and started joining them in their hilarity, because it reminded him of the drunkenness of ecstasy. When Sri Ramakrishna would go into a high state of ecstasy, he couldn't control his limbs and couldn't walk properly, couldn't speak properly, and appeared as if he were drunken. So again, the power of association. Another devotee had such devotion for his guru that he would be overwhelmed with divine feeling at the sight of his guru's neighbors. Krishna consciousness would be kindled in Radha's mind at the sight of a cloud, a blue dress, or a painting of Krishna. She would become restless and cry like a mad person, "Krishna, where art thou? Where art thou?" So just at the sight of something blue, or of a cloud or a painting of Krishna, she would her devotional ecstasy and longing would be enkindled. So then Ghosal, one of the people present there, said, "But madness is not desirable." So Sri Ramakrishna had just said she, Radha, would become restless and cry like a mad person. "Krishna, where art thou?" And Ghosal says, "But madness is not desirable." Master, what do you mean? Was Radha's madness the madness that comes from brooding over worldly objects and makes one unconscious? One attains that madness by meditating on God. Haven't you heard of love madness and knowledge madness? Now, knowledge madness, you remember in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, the time long before the time of the gospel, when a sadhu passed through Dakshineshwar. Many sadhus used to pass through on a daily basis. And so a sadhu came that Sri Ramakrishna recognized as a Paramahamsa of the highest order, a man of the highest knowledge. But he appeared to be a madman. And he was naked, or maybe he had on a few rags, but I believe he was naked, wandering about, dirty, and he would eat with the dogs. In fact, he would put his arm around the neck of a dog and eat along with the dog. And so he red eyes and everything. But Sri Ramakrishna said to Hriday, his nephew, that is not ordinary madness. That's the madness of knowledge. And so a person on the path of knowledge or the path of devotion can become so absorbed in that truth that to our eyes, it looks like madness. It's not madness. It's not what we know as madness. It's not by the degeneration of the integrity of the mind and personality. It's by having attained the highest unity, where all of this is just insignificant. So devotional madness, love madness, or knowledge madness. A Brahmo devotee. How can one realize God? Master, by directing your love to him and constantly reasoning that God alone is real and the world illusory. The Ashwatha tree alone is permanent. Its fruit is transitory. So by directing your love to him and constantly reasoning that God alone is real and the world is illusory. So those two directions, the one, the growth of love, and the other, the growth of dispassion for the world. Brahmo. We have passions like anger and lust. What shall we do with these? Master. Direct the 6 passions to God. The impulse of lust should be turned into the desire to have intercourse with the Atman, the self. Feel angry at those who stand in your way to God. Feel greedy for him, for God. If you must have the feeling of I and mine, then associate it with God. Say, for instance, my Rama, my Krishna. Let me just stop there for a moment and say that Saint Teresa after she had begun to have high states of ecstasy, after her spiritual life had gone far. She said that she'd come to a place where she didn't mind anything and that she was detached from everything in the universe, but the one thing she couldn't stand was to think that someone might love God more than she loved God. So again, that associating I and mine with God, she couldn't bear the thought that somebody might love God more than I love him. If you must have pride, then feel like Bibhishana, who said, I have touched the feet of Ram with my head. I will not bow this head before anyone else. A wonderful idea. I have touched the feet of Ram with this head. I won't bow this head before anyone else. So that kind of abhiman, that kind of pride. Brahmo. If it is God that makes me do everything, then I am not responsible for my sins. So this is a common idea and a common problem in the spiritual life, that if God makes me do everything, then what does it matter what I do? God's responsible, not me. Before Sri Ramakrishna's answer, let me just say that that doesn't work, because we find that karma holds us responsible. As long as we have the sense of that I am the doer, we can think all we want that God is the doer. Think in our heads, not in our hearts, but think in our heads that God is the doer. So it doesn't matter what I do; it's all God's responsibility. But we'll find that the karma comes to us, not to God. So, Master with a smile. Yes, Duryodhana said that also. Duryodhana of the Gita and the Mahabharata. He said, O Krishna, I do what thou seated in my heart makest me do. If a man has the firm conviction that God alone is the doer and he is his instrument, again, the operative word is the firm conviction that God is alone the doer and he is his instrument, then he cannot do anything sinful. Yes, if I am full of that consciousness that God alone is the doer, then I can't do anything sinful. That comes from within my lower mind. It doesn't come from that sense that God is the doer. He who has learned to dance correctly never takes a false step. Another famous statement of Sri Ramakrishna. He who has learned to dance correctly never takes a false step. One cannot even believe in the existence of God until one's heart becomes pure. And so again, there's no sense in saying, well, God does everything, so what does it matter what I do? I can do anything I like because God does everything. Yes, do anything you like, but you have to suffer the consequences because you're doing it with the sense of being the doer. And so the karma phala, the results of the karma of your actions are going to come back to you. So at that time, it won't do to say to the results that are coming to you, the miserable results coming to you, that, but I didn't do it, God made me do it. They still come to you. so that we don't get away with anything. Sri Ramakrishna looked at the devotees assembled in the worship hall and said, it is very good to gather in this way now and then, and think of God and sing his name and glories. But the worldly man's yearning for God is momentary. It lasts as long as a drop of water on a red-hot frying pan. That's as long as the worldly person's devotion lasts. So the worship was about to begin. In fact, let me stop here. There's not time to take the rest. And let me go a little further. Because we started late due to technical difficulties. The worship, that is the Brahmo worship, they were at the Brahmo temple. The worship was about to begin, and the big hall was filled with Brahmo devotees. Some of the Brahmo ladies sat on chairs with music books in their hands. The songs of the Brahmo Samaj were sung to the accompaniment of harmonium and piano. Sri Ramakrishna's joy was unbounded. The invocation was followed by a prayer, and then the worship began. The acharyas seated on the platform recited from the Vedas, Om, thou art our Father, give us right knowledge, do not destroy us, we bow to thee. The Brahmo devotees chanted in chorus with the acharyas, Om, Brahman is truth, knowledge, infinity, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma is from the Taittiriya Upanishad. Brahman is truth, knowledge, infinity. It shines as bliss and immortality. God is peace, blessedness, and the one without a second. It is pure and unstained by sin. The acharyas chanted in praise of God, Om, O reality, cause of the universe, we bow to thee. Then the acharyas chanted their prayer together. From the unreal, lead us to the real. That is, asato ma sadgamaya, etc. From the unreal, lead us to the real. From darkness, lead us to light. From death, lead us to immortality. Reach us through and through, O Rudra, and protect us evermore with thy compassionate face. As Sri Ramakrishna heard these hymns, he went into a spiritual mood. After this, an acharya read a paper. The worship was over. Most of the devotees went downstairs or to the courtyard for fresh air while the refreshments were being made ready. It was about 9 o'clock in the evening. The hosts were so engrossed with the other invited guests that they forgot to pay any attention to Sri Ramakrishna. So here Sri Ramakrishna and his devotees had come for the festival or for the service, and they're seated there in this big hall, and all of the leaders are all busy with other important guests, socially important guests, and so Sri Ramakrishna is just left there alone, Master to Rakhal and the other devotees. What's the matter? Nobody is paying any attention to us. Rakhal, angrily, Sir, let us leave here and go to Dakshineshwar. So Master with a smile, keep quiet. The carriage hire is 3 rupees and 2 annas. Who will pay this? Sri Ramakrishna didn't have any money and Rakhal didn't have any money either, so then they'll be stuck in Calcutta. Stubbornness won't get us anywhere. You haven't a penny and you are making these empty threats. Besides, where shall we find food at this late hour of the night? So, after a long time, dinner was announced. The devotees were asked to take their seats. The master with Rakhal and the others followed the crowd to the second floor. No room could be found for him inside the hall. Finally, with great difficulty, a place was found for him in a dusty corner. A Brahmin woman served some curry, but Sri Ramakrishna could not eat it. He ate luchi with salt and took some sweets, no doubt because either of the woman herself, bad character, or because of the person who had prepared the food, that he could see in the food itself. There was no limit to the master's kindness. The hosts were mere youngsters. How could he be displeased with them, even though they did not show him proper respect? Further, it would have been inauspicious for the household, if a holy man had left the place without taking food. Finally, the feast had been prepared in the name of God. Sri Ramakrishna got into the carriage, but who was to pay the hire? The hosts could not be found. Referring to this incident afterwards, the master said to the devotees jokingly, the boys went to our hosts for the carriage hire. First they were put out, but at last they managed to get together 3 rupees. Our hosts refused to pay the extra 2 annas and said, no, that will do. And thus the day ended. So again, M points out, because it would be easy to miss, because of Sri Ramakrishna joking to Rakhal about what will your anger do? Who's got the fare? And who's going to feed us this time of night? But M saw the deeper meaning in that, and the fact that Sri Ramakrishna took some luchi and salt so that he would take something, even though he couldn't take the curries and other things, but he took something so that the hosts would not receive anything inauspicious. Because a holy man like Sri Ramakrishna coming to their house and leaving without taking anything, then that was considered and is considered inauspicious for the host. So Sri Ramakrishna, even if he went somewhere to someone's house and the host didn't offer him anything, before leaving he would ask for a glass of water so that no harm would come to the hosts. And so here, it wasn't that he wanted the luchis either, but he had to take something so that the hosts would not be harmed. And he didn't leave, not just because they didn't have the money, that of course was a good enough reason, but also because if he had left with his party and the party had been angry, then that also would be inauspicious for the hosts. And so even though the host didn't pay proper attention to him, he did pay proper attention to them to see that no harm would come to them. So we'll stop here. I don't know if there are any questions. I don't really have time for questions. No, Surenji says there are no questions. And that's good for today because I have a conference at 12 o'clock, which means in 3 minutes. So I'll give a closing chant. But before the closing chant, let me say this is the end of our services for the summer. In August, which begins on Saturday, Saturday is the 1st of August will have no lectures and classes. So the center will be closed. If someone wants to come to make pranam to the shrine during August, they can call me, and if I'm here, you can certainly come. It's not that we're going to bolt down, board up the doors or anything, but there are no activities here during August. And so we'll begin again from the very beginning of September. I believe the 1st of September is a class day. I forget whether it's a Tuesday or Thursday, but we will begin on the 1st of September. And then on the 17th of October, we will have Durga Puja. And because of the pandemic, we won't set up the tent outside and have 700 people coming and sitting in the tent. We'll have the puja here in the hall, and people will not be allowed to come to see it. We will live stream the puja. And only those who are attending to the worship, to the service of the Divine Mother will be in here. But after the worship, we will give out boxes of prasad to all of those who come by car to pick it up. So with that, I will close our season of lectures and classes to begin again in September. So I wish everyone all good, stay safe, stay healthy, and hope all are well, remain well, and we look forward to seeing you again at the beginning of September. So let me give a closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhrita Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamaha. Om Sarvasturatu